Zanil was only 24 when she married Tabo and moved into his family home in Durban. She had dreamed of building a happy life with him, but that dream quickly turned heavy. Tabo's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ndlovu, were strict, proud people who never hid their dislike for her. To them, Zanil came from nothing. They reminded her of this almost every day, calling her poor, unworthy, and not good enough for their son. What hurt most was that Tabo rarely stood up for her. Whenever his parents scolded or mocked her, he stayed silent or even agreed with them. Zanil tried to fit in. She cooked their meals, cleaned the house, and kept her head down. Still, nothing she did seemed to please them. She felt like an outsider in her own marriage, a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Every smile she forced and every insult she swallowed chipped away at her spirit, but she kept going, hoping that things might change. When her son Lutho was born, Zanil thought his arrival would soften the household. A baby, she believed, could bring joy and maybe even bring the family closer. For a brief moment, she was hopeful. She cradled Lutho in her arms and felt stronger, as if she finally had something that was hers alone, untouchable. But instead of healing the cracks, his birth made the tension worse. The Ndlovus criticized how she held him, how she fed him, even the clothes she dressed him in. They made it clear. In their eyes, neither Zanil nor her baby truly belonged. The night it happened, the rain in Durban fell harder than Zanil had ever seen. The wind rattled the windows, thunder shook the walls, and the air smelled of wet earth. Inside the Ndlova home, little Lutho stirred in his sleep. Zanil noticed they were almost out of diapers, and though she hated leaving her baby even for a moment, she thought it would be safe to run quickly to the nearby shop. She turned to her in-laws before leaving and said softly, "Please, just keep an eye on him. I'll be back in a few minutes." The shop was only a short walk away, but in the storm it felt much longer. The rain soaked through her clothes as she hurried, clutching the small pack of diapers against her chest. Her heart pounded with worry the whole way back, though she couldn't explain why. When she finally pushed open the front gate and ran into the yard, the sight that met her froze her in place. There, in the dark and pouring rain, was Lutho. Her baby, her tiny, helpless baby, was lying on the cold ground, crying, his clothes drenched and sticking to his shivering body. His little hands reached out, desperate for comfort, his face wet with both rain and tears. Zanil dropped the diapers and screamed his name, rushing to scoop him into her arms. Her heart broke as she felt his body trembling against her chest. She pulled off her shawl, wrapping it around him to shield him from the storm, whispering, "Mama's here, my boy, Mama's here." Behind her, laughter rang out. She turned to see her in-laws standing on the veranda, dry and warm under the roof, watching her struggle. Mrs. Ndlova smirked, her voice sharp and cruel. "If you can't protect him, you don't deserve him." Mr. Ndlova chuckled beside her, as if it were a joke. Zanil's eyes filled with tears, not just from the cold rain but from a pain deeper than words. She turned to Tabo, who had been standing there with them. Her heart begged him to step forward, to shout at his parents, to defend her and their child. But he didn't. He kept his arms folded, his face stiff, as if nothing wrong had happened. His silence was louder than the thunder above them. Zanil held Lutho tighter, rocking him as he cried against her chest. In that moment, she felt something inside her break. Her husband's silence cut deeper than his parents' insults. The people who should have protected her child had left him in the rain, and the man she loved had done nothing. She stood there in the storm, drenched and shivering with her baby, feeling completely alone. That night was more than cruelty. It was betrayal. And though she said nothing, a fire began to burn quietly inside her. Zanil carried Lutho inside that night with her clothes dripping and her hands shaking. She laid him on the bed, pulled off his wet onesie, and wrapped him in a towel. Her heart cracked as she rubbed his tiny arms and legs, trying to warm him. He whimpered softly, his little lips trembling from the cold. She kissed his forehead again and again, whispering, "Mama's here, my boy, you're safe now." Tears rolled down her face, but she forced herself to stay calm for him. As she sat rocking him, she felt the weight of everything crash down on her. The insults, the mockery, the silence of her husband, and now this, the cruelest act of all. She looked at Lutho's fragile body and made a promise deep in her chest. They will regret this. One day, they'll see who I am. She didn't say it out loud to anyone else, but she repeated it to herself over and over like a prayer. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She cooked breakfast, cleaned the dishes, and kept her face straight while her in-laws carried on, as if leaving a baby in the rain was normal. But inside, Zanil was no longer the same. She was done waiting for kindness that would never come. She began to think about how she could escape this house, how she could stand on her own feet with her baby by her side. At night, while everyone else slept, Zanil searched quietly for opportunities. She heard about a women's empowerment program run by a local NGO in Durban that helped women learn skills and start small businesses. It sounded like a lifeline, a door to the future she wanted. She secretly filled in the forms, writing carefully in the little space where they asked about her dreams. She didn't tell Tabo. She didn't tell anyone. It was her secret, her first step toward freedom. But dreams alone weren't enough. She needed money. So she took on whatever odd jobs she could find. She washed clothes for neighbors, babysat other children, and helped sell food at the local market. Sometimes she worked until late at night, coming home with only a few rand in her pocket. It wasn't much, but she saved every cent. She hid her money in a small box tucked inside her clothes drawer, counting it slowly whenever she was alone. Each day was heavy, but the fire in her chest kept her moving. She would smile at Lutho, play with him, and whisper about the life she was building for them. On the outside, she was the quiet daughter-in-law who obeyed and endured. On the inside, she was a woman preparing to rise. The pain she carried stayed silent, but it was shaping her into something stronger than Ndlovis could ever imagine. When Zanil got accepted into the Women's Empowerment Program, she felt like a door had finally opened. On the first day, she sat quietly at the back of the room, nervous and unsure if she even belonged there. The other women were talking about their dreams, opening salons, running catering businesses, selling crafts. When it was her turn, she stood up with her hands trembling, but her voice steady. I want to make baby clothes. Clothes that are good quality, but still affordable for mothers like me. The mentors leaned in curious. They asked her why. Zanil told them about how difficult it was to find durable, comfortable clothes for babies without paying a fortune. She explained how many mothers in her community struggled, just like her, trying to give their children the best while managing on very little. Her words came straight from the heart, and the mentors were impressed. They didn't just hear an idea, they heard a vision rooted in real experience. Soon, she was learning about sewing machines, fabric cutting, and basic business skill. She didn't have money to buy materials, but the program connected her with donors who gave her rolls of leftover fabric. Zanil treated those pieces like gold. Late at night, when her baby was asleep, she set up her small sewing machine and began stitching tiny shirts, soft blankets, and colorful onesies. Every item she made carried her love and determination. She started by giving a few clothes to mothers she knew in her neighborhood. The reaction was overwhelming. The moms couldn't believe the quality of the stitching, the comfort of the fabrics, and the thoughtful details, like extra buttons or stretch in the waistband, that made life easier for both mother and child. Word spread quickly, one neighbor telling another. Soon, Zanil had women knocking on her door asking, "Do you have more of those baby outfits?" Her little room, once only filled with Lutho's toys and her hidden savings box, turned into a small workshop. Fabric scraps lay on the floor, colorful threads hung on the wall, and half-finished clothes waited neatly on the table. She worked while humming softly to Lutho, who sometimes sat beside her, watching with wide eyes as the machine clicked and worked. The first time she earned money from selling her clothes, Zanil held the notes in her hand and cried quietly. It wasn't much, but it was proof that she could create something of value, proof that she was not the poor and unworthy woman her in-laws called her. Every rand she earned went back into buying zippers, buttons, or better thread. Slowly, her small business began to take shape. The mothers in the community became her biggest supporters, not just buying from her, but telling everyone about her. Zanil no longer felt invisible. Her hidden strength was beginning to show, and for the first time in a long time, she believed she and Lutho had a real chance at a better life. When Zanil finally packed her few belongings into 2 old suitcases, she felt both terrified and free. Lutho sat on her hip as she carried the bags out of the Ndlovis house, refusing to look back. Her in-laws stood at the door, smirking. Mrs. Ndlova's voice cut through the air like a knife. "You'll crawl back to us. You'll see. Life out there is harder than you think." Mr. Ndlova chuckled, and even Tabo only shook his head, saying nothing to stop her. But Zanil didn't answer them. She simply tightened her grip on her baby and walked away into the cool evening, her heart pounding with both fear and determination. She had rented a tiny single room in a rundown building, with cracked walls and a leaky roof, but to her it felt like freedom. It was the first place she could call her own, the first space where nobody could insult her or make her feel small. Life was not easy. During the day, she cared for Lutho, feeding him, playing with him, carrying him on her back when she had to run errands. At night, after putting him to sleep, she worked at her sewing machine until her eyes grew heavy. She stitched baby clothes, packed them neatly, and prepared for the early morning markets. Sometimes she would stand for hours under the hot sun, calling out to passing mothers. Affordable baby clothes, strong fabric, soft for your little one. Slowly, coins and notes filled her purse, and she learned how to stretch every rand. Zanil's room soon became more than just a home. It was her workshop and her dream in progress. Fabric piled up in corners, notebooks filled with her designs lay on the table, and posters of smiling babies she drew by hand served as her first branding. She didn't know much about business, but she was eager to learn. She discovered a local community center with free internet access, and whenever she had time, she attended their workshops. There, she taught herself the basics of accounting, how to track her expenses, calculate profits, and plan for growth. She even found free online courses that showed her how to build a brand and attract customers. The words were sometimes confusing, but she took notes carefully, reading them over late at night while Lutho slept beside her. She practiced making simple flyers with bold letters, and soon, mothers from nearby neighborhoods recognized the name Lutho Baby Care. Every day tested her strength. There were nights she went hungry, so her child could eat. There were mornings when she wanted to stay in bed, but the thought of her in-laws' cruel laughter pushed her forward. Each sale at the market felt like a victory, each smile from a satisfied mother a reminder of why she was doing that. Zanille was no longer the woman they mocked in that big house. In her small room, with her baby's laughter echoing against the walls, she was building something powerful. She wasn't crawling back, she was climbing higher, step by step. 2 years after leaving the Ndlova's house, Zanille's life looked nothing like the one she had once endured. What had started as late-night sewing in a tiny rented room had now grown into something far bigger than she ever imagined. Her brand, Lutho Baby Care, named after her son, became a household name in Durban. Mothers loved her products not only because they were affordable, but because they were made with care. The clothes were soft, durable, and designed with real mothers in mind. Every detail, extra buttons, stretchy seams, playful colors, showed her understanding of what parents needed. Word spread quickly, first through neighborhoods, then through larger markets, until even local supermarkets began to take notice. One store manager approached her after seeing how fast her products sold at a community fair. "Your brand deserves a shelf," he told her. That moment was life-changing. Soon, Lutho Baby Care was stocked in supermarkets across Durban, and within months, orders were coming in from Johannesburg, Cape Town, and even across borders in Botswana and Mozambique. Her little sewing machine had grown into a workshop with several machines, fabric cutters, and workers by her side. Success didn't change Zanille's heart. She remembered the women she had met along her journey, the mothers struggling alone, the young girls desperate for opportunity. Instead of hiring strangers, she opened her doors to single mothers in need of work. She trained them, paid them fairly, and gave them the same chance she once prayed for. "We're not just making clothes," she told them. "We're making a future for our children." With her growing income, Zanille finally bought a modern home. It had bright white walls, a small garden for Lutho to play in, and a big kitchen where she cooked meals filled with laughter instead of insults. For the first time, she felt the joy of walking into her own home without fear of someone mocking her. She decorated Lutho's room with colorful curtains and shelves of toys, a symbol of the childhood she promised he would never lose to cruelty. Her story began to spread beyond her customers. Local newspapers wrote about her, calling her a self-made entrepreneur and an inspiration for women across South Africa. Radio stations invited her to share her journey, and women in villages far from Durban spoke her name with hope. She wasn't just selling baby clothes anymore. She was becoming a symbol of strength and possibility. At community events, people would line up just to shake her hand, saying, "You showed us it can be done." Every time Zanille stood on stage to speak, she thought of the cold night when her baby was left crying in the rain. That pain had fueled her, carried her, and transformed her. Lutho Baby Care was no longer just a brand. It was proof that out of heartbreak, something powerful could be born. And at the center of it all was Zanille, a mother who had risen higher than anyone expected. The Ndlovas had always walked with pride, their heads high, believing their family business made them untouchable. For years, they boasted about their success, looking down on Zanille as if she would never measure up. But time has a way of revealing truth. Their business, which once seemed strong, slowly began to crumble. Poor decisions, greed, and mismanagement drained their profits. Loyal clients left, suppliers stopped calling, and soon the once respected Ndlova family was drowning in debts. Whispers spread through Durban. People who once admired them began to shake their heads. They thought they were better than everyone, neighbors muttered. Now look at them. Invitations to events stopped coming. Their seats at community gatherings remained empty. The power and influence they once held slipped away, piece by piece, until they were left clinging to a reputation that no longer existed. Thabo, who had always stood behind his parents, found himself caught in the storm. The money was gone, the business was gone, and the security he had always known was gone too. With nowhere else to turn, he finally came knocking at Zanille's door. The sight of him standing there, shoulders hunched, eyes desperate, was almost surreal. "Zanille," he said softly, "please. I need your help. The business has failed. My parents, they're suffering. You've done so well for yourself. Maybe you could support us for a while." For a moment, she just looked at him. This was the same man who had watched his parents humiliate her, the same man who stood silent as her baby was left crying in the rain. Memories of her pain came rushing back, sharper than ever. She took a deep breath, her voice steady but cold. "Where were you," she asked, "when your parents left our child outside in the storm? Where were you when I begged for your support, and you chose silence? You let them break me, Tabo, and now you want me to save you." Tabo lowered his head, unable to answer. His silence now carried shame instead of pride. Zanil stood tall, her son playing happily in the background, unaware of the storm of emotions in the room. She did not raise her voice, but every word she spoke was final. "I built this life from nothing," she told him. "Not for you, not for them, for me and my child. I will not carry the same people who tried to destroy me." With that, she closed the door, leaving him outside. Tabo walked away slowly, carrying the weight of regret heavier than any debt. The Ndlovis downfall became the talk of the community. People who once feared or respected them now pitied them. Their pride was shattered, their business gone, and their influence reduced to nothing. Meanwhile, Zanil's star only shone brighter. The tables had turned, and the family that once mocked her now lived in the shadow of her strength. The hall was packed that Saturday afternoon. Bright banners hung across the stage with words that made Zanil's heart skip, celebrating women in business. Community leaders, shop owners, teachers, and mothers all filled the seats, buzzing with excitement. For weeks, people had been talking about this event, and everyone knew who the guest of honor was. Zanil, the woman who had built Lutho Baby Care from nothing into one of the most trusted baby brands in Durban. Zanil walked onto the stage in a simple but elegant dress, her natural confidence shining through. The audience erupted in applause, some women even standing to cheer for her. She smiled not out of pride but out of gratitude. She remembered the days when she couldn't even afford rent, when she worked until her eyes ached just to feed her child. Now here she was, celebrated not for her suffering but for her strength. Among the crowd sat the Ndlovis. Once, they had been the center of attention at such gathering, seated in the front row, admired for their wealth. But today they sat quietly in the middle of the audience, blending in with the people they once looked down on. They watched as Zanil, the woman they had insulted and mocked, stood in the spotlight that used to belong to them. Every clap for her was a sting to their pride. The host introduced her warmly, telling the story of how she had started with donated fabrics and built an empire that now employed dozens of women. The audience listened with admiration, nodding and clapping at every milestone. When Zanil received her award, a shining plaque that read Outstanding Woman Entrepreneur, the hall thundered with cheers. Cameras flashed, and children waved little flags with her brand's name. Then came the moment that silenced the room. A journalist stood and asked, "Zanil, what gave you the strength to do all of this? What was your true motivation?" Zanil paused for a second, her eyes scanning the crowd. She didn't look for the Ndlovis, but she knew they were there. Holding the microphone steady, she spoke clearly. "Once, my baby was left crying in the rain. That night broke me, but it also woke me. I decided that pain would not end me, it would fuel me. I turned that pain into purpose." The hall erupted with applause, some people even shouting bravo. Women wiped tears from their eyes, touched by the raw honesty of her words. Zanil stood tall, her son Lutho smiling proudly from the front row. The Ndlovis shrank further into their seats, their faces stiff with humiliation. Around them, whispers rose. "Isn't that the family that mistreated her? Imagine, they once called her unworthy." The same community that once bowed to them now turned their admiration to Zanil. That day, Zanil wasn't just honored, she became a symbol. And for the Ndlovis, sitting powerless in the shadows, it was the bitterest humiliation of all. The Ndlovis' big house, once full of visitors and laughter, had grown silent. The gates that used to open for fancy cars now stayed shut most days. The family business was gone, swallowed by debts they could not pay. Bills piled on the kitchen table, and creditors called at all hours. The pride that once carried them so high had vanished, leaving only bitterness and shame. Illness soon found its way into the house. Mr. Ndlova's health weakened under the stress, his strong voice now reduced to a cough and a wheeze. Mrs. Ndlovu, who once walked proudly through the community, hardly left the house anymore. She could not face the stares, the whispers, the silent judgment of people who remembered how she had mocked Zanil. The very neighbors she once looked down on now pitied her, and pity cut deeper than any insult. Word spread through Durban, and it stuck like a stain. "That's the family who mistreated Zanil, the woman who became greater than all of them." People said it in the markets, at church, at weddings. Even their closest friends stopped visiting. Nobody wanted to be associated with the Ndlovis anymore. The invitations that once filled their calendar disappeared. Their phones, which once buzzed with calls from powerful people, now stayed quiet. Tabo, too, carried the weight of regret. He had left his parents' side when their wealth dried up, but he couldn't escape the shame. Every time he saw Zanil's face in the newspaper or on a billboard for her brand, he remembered the night he stood silent as his baby was left in. He remembered the door she closed on him when he came begging for help. His guilt became a shadow that followed him everywhere. Inside their home, the Ndlovis replayed their mistakes again and again. Mrs. Ndlovu would sit by the window, her hands trembling, whispering, "If only we had treated her better, if only we had shown her kindness." But it was always followed by silence, because deep down they knew it was too late. Sometimes they saw Zanil on television, smiling with other women she had empowered, talking about her business with pride. They heard the community celebrate her, calling her a role model, a leader, a woman of strength. Every word of praise for her was another reminder of their cruelty. Regret consumed them, but regret had no power to change the past. They could not erase the night they left a crying baby in the rain. They could not erase the years of insults and humiliation. They had destroyed their chance to be part of her success, and now they lived with the bitter truth. The woman they once tried to crush had risen higher than they ever had, while they were left behind with nothing but sickness, debts, and the heavy weight of shame. Zanil stood in her office, the skyline of Durban stretching out before her. Company, Lutho Baby Care, was now a name known across southern Africa. The walls were filled with pictures of smiling mothers, her team of workers, and of course Lutho. No longer the fragile baby she once carried through storms, but a bright, happy child thriving in the life she had fought to build. Every morning she walked into her office with confidence, not just as a businesswoman, but as a mother who had turned pain into power. She was no longer the quiet, fearful daughter-in-law who bowed her head to insult. She was a leader, a provider, and proof that strength could grow even from the deepest wounds. At an interview one day, a journalist asked her the question that always lingered. "Do you forgive your in-laws for what they did to you?" Zanil paused, her face calm, her voice steady. "I forgive them," she said, "but I will never forget. Their cruelty built the fire that made me who I am today. Without that pain, I might never have found this strength." Her words spread across newspapers, radio shows, and social media, touching people far beyond Durban. Many women repeated her quote as a reminder of their own resilience. And then she added the line that would stay with everyone who heard it. "They left my baby in the rain, but I rose like the storm that washed them away." It was more than a sentence. It was her truth, her final word. The world applauded her strength, but deep down Zanil knew it all began with one vow whispered on a cold, stormy night. "They will regret this."